Welcome to World Insight, coming to you from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. On today's program, nations across Asia and Europe have embraced China's Belt and Road Initiative, but financing the ambitious project remains a serious challenge. And we sit down with comedian Mark Roswell, also known as Dashan in China. He spoke with us about what it's like to perform Chinese stand-up comedy and the cultural differences that have shaped his experiences. And we start today's show with a look at the Chinese overseas trade and investments. The first half of 2016 saw a rapid rise in Chinese investments abroad. China's Belt and Road Initiative is helping to drive that growth. Exactly 3 years ago, China proposed the One Belt, One Road initiative, aiming to boost the regional growth. Now, China and the countries along the Silk Road, both on land and on the sea, are benefiting from the plan.
China's maritime economy is booming. The total production value of Chinese maritime industries reached around $970 billion last year, a 7% increase from 1940. China's maritime economy accounted for 9.4% of China's total GDP. Maritime tourism was a key engine of growth. It grew 11.4%. The maritime economy of South China's Guangdong province has grown by 10% each year over the past 5 years. China's coastal provinces, including Shandong and Fujian, all aim to increase their maritime economy over the next 5 years. China's maritime economy is gaining in national and regional importance. In 2013, President Xi Jinping proposed building a new maritime Silk Road to boost regional economic growth. The aim is to enhance political trust and promote cultural understanding among regional partners through economic cooperation. All countries along the maritime Silk Road are welcome to join the initiative.
For more discussion on China's Belt and Road Initiative, we are joined in our Beijing studio Mr. Zhang Jianping, who is the Director of Department of International Economic Cooperation with the National Development and Reform Commission. Mr. Zhang, welcome to our program. Meanwhile, joining us from New Delhi in India, we are having Professor Madhav Malapat, who is a UNESCO Peace Chair and also Director of the Geopolitics and International Relations Department at Manipal University. Meanwhile, joining us from Brussels in Europe, we are having Mr. Fraser Cameron, Director of the EU Asia Centre and former British diplomat and EU official. Gentlemen, welcome to the three of you. So, the idea of OBOR is to link China, the rest of Asia, with Africa and also the European continent. But how that can be done is still a big question mark. Before I let the Chinese guests to talk about it, let me ask you, Mr. Cameron, what about the European understanding as to where it should start and how big it will become?
Well, there are many open questions. It's a very ambitious project. The kind of infrastructure projects we're talking about can sometimes take, 10, 20 years to come to fruition. So it will take a long time before we actually see One Belt, One Road really connecting. But I think the vision is important, and I think it's important that we try and get the European Union to link in with China. And this is already happening at a low level. We have the Chinese investing in the European Investment Program, and we have the European Investment Bank investing in One Belt, One Road. So there is the basis now for cooperation, and the important thing is to try and find some joint projects. So in principle, the EU is very keen on this, but of course there are huge numbers of practical problems to overcome. But both sides are now working on it, and that's important.
Professor Nalapat, from your perspective, India, of course, is one of the most important countries along the OBOR, but what about funding?
Well, I would say that this is a very, as Mr. Cameron has said, this is an extremely ambitious project. In my view, if you look at the historical terms, I think after the Great Wall of China, this is clearly the most ambitious infrastructure project that's ever been attempted by China. And should it succeed, it will link Europe and Asia together into one common market almost. And that is an extremely a very, very powerful vision for the future, a vision of cooperation. Relationship between Asia and Europe has not always been friendly. In fact, there have been a lot of conflicts. But should OBOR become a reality, I think we can look forward to a much more peaceful relationship that will promote prosperity.
Right.
So it's a very important project. In this, India will have to play a major role because the Indian economy is a big economy and is expanding very fast.
Well, we do have some numbers to share with everybody about the amount of investment that is needed. The Asia Development Bank estimates Asia needs $8 trillion to fund infrastructure projects in Asia over the next 10 years. 3 financial institutions have been set up to support the development plan. Let's take a look at this.
In July 2015, Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa established a BRICS multilateral development bank called the New Development Bank. The bank was seeded with $50 billion in initial capital. The group plans to increase the bank's registered capital to $100 billion. In December 2014, China launched a $40 billion Silk Road Infrastructure Fund to help finance One Belt, One Road infrastructure projects. In December 2015, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank began its operation. The AIIB aspired to be a global development bank with 57 member countries, under registered capital of $100 billion.
Having said all of this, this is still not enough.
Yeah.
$8 trillion for Asia alone. Of course, that's Asia Development Bank's plan.
Yeah.
OBOR is not necessarily covered everywhere in Asia, but still a big part. Some were suggesting $2 to $3 trillion for the overall OBOR project. Some were even suggesting much more than that. So, Mr. Zhang, where does the money come from?
Yes. I think that now, if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative as a mega regional economic cooperation platform, on which you may find that not only in Asia but also in the rest part of this platform.
Yes.
And the demand side for infrastructure improvement and for trade and investment in the future, definitely demand side the money there is a very huge number. But from supply side, you mentioned the AIIB, you mentioned the Silk Road Fund. Even if now World Bank and ADB already claim that they will support some of infrastructure projects along the routes. Meanwhile, China, Japan, US, the EU countries, they have their international financial institutions. All of those financial institutions together, every year their supply capital also quite limited. Maybe $100 billion, even if $200 billion, but you will find that there is a very big gap between supply and demand. So my suggestion is that in the future, public-private partnership, this type of cooperation and this type of model has to be introduced, because we need to encourage those private capital enter this field, and then we can promote our infrastructure improvements gradually.
Mr. Cameron, having heard what your Chinese counterpart just said, I also want to ask you about that. If, of course, European capitals did not come up with the idea of the OBOR, but certainly this is going to be a cooperative project. I was talking to some of the European scholars on this, about funding at least, that they were suggesting some numbers to me, which are interesting. I would like to share with you, Mr. Cameron. They are suggesting that the amount of money coming from the current China's own existing financial institutions supporting infrastructure and other projects around the world, for example, China Development Bank and also China Exim Bank, which is the import and export bank. Actually, the amount is bigger now than the existing AIIB plus the Silk Road Fund and some of the other institutions combined for OBOR alone. So this is an interesting phenomenon, which is how are we going to see these two different kinds of funds? Is it going to be more about institutions focusing on OBOR in the future, where the funding come from, or is it still going to be coming from very traditional national development banks, not only in China, but also in other countries as well? Mr. Cameron, your thoughts here?
Well, the first point is that it's not just a question of finance. there is money available for good quality infrastructure projects, but in all major projects you have to undertake risk assessment. And if you look at the route of OBOR, it's going through some very sensitive countries which are not exactly stable, whether it could be Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Syria route, or through Central Asia, the northern route. So investors are going to look very carefully at the political risk involved before they invest money there. Secondly, there's a question of corporate governance. The major financial institutions will want to see proper international standards and oversight, transparency for the bidding of contracts, and also for ensuring that the projects meet the requirements for sustainable development.
What about you, Professor Nalapat? What do you make of it? Who's likely to be the major players providing the funding, given some of the complex factors? Will some of the other factors become the excuses for not participating? And will people or countries, government passively waiting for fundings to come in to build their own infrastructure projects?
Well, you know, I'd like to point out that it's a good time to, for OBOR, for a simple reason that infrastructure, the industry in China has really reached a takeoff stage. I mean, across China you see a massive amount of infrastructure being built, and quite a lot of that is very high quality infrastructure. In fact, if you look at the public infrastructure in some parts of China, it's even better than the public infrastructure in the United States or in most parts of Europe. So I think it's good timing, frankly, to launch an OBOR. And the second point is, look, for example, railways in the United States. Now, railways were a game changer in the United States, and railways, you know, were actually funded by large groups of people. So my own view is, yes, a few large banks will be there, exchequers will be there, but I think we have to also ensure that people across the route, people in the region, also get involved in this project.
That's right.
And certainly if they have a belief that this is going to improve their lives, if, as Mr. Cameron says, there are clear settled principles regarding the management and regarding, for example, even the profitability of various segments of this very huge project, I think you are going to get a large number, tens of millions of people are also going to contribute the way hundreds of thousands of people contribute in the United States to build that huge railway system in the US.
Mr. Zhang, two things. One is what Mr. Cameron have just mentioned, the important factor, due diligence check. The other thing is, this is not necessarily a China project, is it? Is it about China trying to solve its overcapacity problem, as some have accused?
Yeah.
Or is it going to be a grand plan so that everybody put their own share and their contribution into the overall projects with some support from the others so that it could work? Is it one of those, as people describe, as the Marshall Plan, which is about the United States saving Europe as right after the Second World War? Or this is everybody's Marshall Plan in a way that everybody contributes?
Yeah, there are some of points.
A very interesting point. I think we need to tackle some of those.
The first point is that you mentioned the project. I like to say that actually last December, actually in NDRC there is an office for the Belt and Road Initiative.
Your home
my
organization.
Home department.
That's right.
And jointly with China's Foreign Language Bureau, we released official translation on the Belt and Road Initiative instead of OBO in the past. Especially we said that project, program, strategy, this type of saying will not be suitable for the Belt and Road Initiative. We think that tangibly this is BRI is an initiative from Chinese side, and we hope that all of those country and economy along the routes we could be a democratic family, and we can work together. We can discuss some of things on the platform, and we can promote it. This is important, meaning.
Mr. Cameron, are European capitals capable politically to participate and make their contribution to this initiative, which is about everybody do their own share if we have a common goal together. Given the fact of some of the crises you have politically inside Europe, and also the different kinds of political situations and economic situations in different European countries. Mr. Cameron.
Yes, I mean, there's plenty of money around with the European Investment Bank, other international institutions willing to invest in Europe and along the One Belt, One Road. The question is finding feasible projects. If you take one example just now, the Belgrade to Budapest Railway, the Chinese wanted to go ahead of this without taking into account that there was EU money involved here, that Serbia was an associate member of the European Union, and therefore there were certain rules that had to be applied in terms of public procurement, in terms of environment, etc. So I think that was a learning process for the Chinese companies involved. And so you can't rush into these projects. They take some time, some planning, but certainly Europe wants to be involved. Europe and China have a very strong economic relationship, and now they have to identify the concrete areas where both will benefit from working together.
Professor Nalapat, we understand China, when it was building its huge infrastructure over the past few decades, it was done in a very different kinds of framework, and everything make way for reform and opening up. That's the priority. However, in different countries, priorities are different. Some are more willing to change priorities for its economic development and connectivity. Others might not necessarily so, for whatever reason. So, given that fact, will this Belt and Road Initiative be able to be achieved as the initiators at the very beginning have imagined, at least during the time frame? And also, is this going to be dragged down by all kinds of political taboos? Well, I am talking about taboos, not necessarily regulations and rules, which should be very much respected.
Well, I'd like to say that the old saying, well begun is half done. And the point is that this is a massive project, and if it is well begun, and it is very clear that benefits are going to flow, that benefits are already flowing from that part where the One Belt, One Road is already a reality, then in my view, you're going to get a lot of pressure on governments that are now saying it's a taboo. Take, for example, Japan. Japan, the Japanese government is not at all happy, it seems, with One Belt, One Road, but the fact is Japanese companies may want to participate in that. American companies may want to participate in that, and they are going to be putting pressure on their respective government to say, look, forget about taboos, we want to participate.
Right.
We want to share in this prosperity. So I think it's very, very clear One Belt, One Road is a Chinese idea, and the China is the driving force behind the idea. But the point is, if it is clear to the entire world, one, it is a win-win kind of situation. It's not the old, Europe, Asia kind of coming together, in which Europe colonized Asia and it became a zero-sum game. Asia became poor and the money flowed to Europe. If it's a win-win situation, both sides become prosperous, all countries participating in this become prosperous.
Mr. Zhang, my final question for you. There are several questions already popped up during the two gentlemen's wonderful answers. One of the things I want to call to your attention is that the old, shall I say, the ancient Silk Road, it was done with the grassroots initiative.
Yeah.
People felt about the need to trade, and therefore they just cross whatever continents and lands that's needed to get it done. But this time we see government's participation and government initiatives a lot. So how do you compare these two? And will the latest plan, bring up a successful result?
In the past, especially in old dynasty, you may find that Silk Road actually mainly formulated and promoted by trade. Also, at that time, you will find that the transportation tools quite simple. That's just camel
Right.
and human resources. But today you will find that actually the Belt and Road Initiative not only means only one belt, not only means only one road. Actually, there are many roads, many belts. They connect each other, formulate transportation networks, production network, new global value chain, on which you may find that between China and those countries along the routes, actually we can create new global value chain, and on which every country they can find their positions,
Right.
on which they have their advantages. Also, we can invest much more on those chains, and then every country can have job opportunities, development opportunities. Also, all of countries can benefit from that province. Especially, mutual investment will promote international trade on the platform, and then we can benefit from that platform.
Right. Certainly, it's a grand plan. This is already third year after this initiative was being brought up by the Chinese side. But certainly, its realization needs everybody's support and their own willingness to build their own infrastructure and make their economies better. Yeah. Thank you so much, Zhang Jianping and Fraser Cameron, Professor Nalapat from India as well. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Earlier, we sat down with Mark Roswell, also known as Dashan, for a one-on-one interview. He spoke with us about what it's like to be China's most famous foreigner and how cultural differences have shaped his work as a comedian. You're watching World Insight from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. Dashan once was a household name in China. It is a Chinese name for Mark Roswell, a Canadian who has become a symbol for successful integration into the Chinese culture. Dashan speaks fluent Putonghua or Standard Chinese and loves Chinese culture. Of course, China has changed so much over the years, and so has he. He has worked 3 decades in China, first as a pop culture celebrity, then as a business person, and now as a stand-up comedian. He performs for audiences in China in many cities across the country and also in Standard Chinese. I asked Dashan earlier about his experiences in China, but first, this background story.
A foreign comic walks into a Chinese bar. Under rotating ceiling fans and hot, crowded bars, an edgier form of entertainment is emerging in China, stand-up comedy. It is a comic style in which a comedian performs in front of a live audience, usually speaking directly to them. A stand-up comedy routine generally includes humorous stories and jokes. This style of comedy has a small yet growing following in China. Many comedy groups like Beijing Talk Show Club, Stand Up China, and Kung Fu Comedy have joined in on this new niche of entertainment. And it is not just confined to bars and clubs now. More and more comedians are introducing it into TV programs. Performers like Wang Zijian from Tonight 80s Talk Show, Huang Xi, Zhou Wang, and Chinese-American comedian Brother Sui are all popularizing stand-up comedy. Dashan, or Mark Roswell, who is more famous for his Chinese crosstalk style of comedy, is also giving stand-up a shot. For the past 2 years, he has been exploring the nascent stand-up comedy scene in China and is developing his own solo show called Dashan Live. He says it's extremely exciting and rewarding to be doing something so fresh and cutting-edge for the Chinese market. He's also working on combining this Western form of comedy with Chinese traditional performance.
说的是啊，在那1953年美帝的河滩阴谋被揭穿啊，这也不好，不合适了，不合适，你知道吗？这又是老毛病，知道吗？我发现加拿大人和中国人凑在一起的时候，最让我们开心的事情就是骂美国。
What about that joke? about the American imperialists.
That's a very famous story from the Korean War about a successful attack on this American forces and everything. And anybody who knows Kwaibar will know that one, right? It's a typical story of fighting against the American imperialists and everything. And I get up and I start to do it, and then I realize, oh, I can't say that. I can't say that. There's some Americans in the audience. I said, you know, sorry. That's, you know, when Chinese and Canadians get together, that's one of the things we enjoy the most, just making fun of Americans.
What is it like for you, Dashan, to, in a way, offend friendly to a part of your audience while make all the rest of them laugh?
Well, first of all, most of the humor is aimed at myself, right? It's making fun of myself. And other times, I think as long as it's done in a spirit of respect, you can have fun at someone's expense. You know, some people don't take it. Most people do, as long as they show as you're respectful. And as long as you're making fun of everything. If you're making fun of yourself, first of all, so that sort of gives you some allowance to make fun of other people. But I think respect is an important thing. You know, it's not just making fun of people, it's having fun with them, you know, and everyone lighten up a little bit.
Kwaibar, what exactly is it?
Kwaibar and xiangsheng all belong to the category of traditional Chinese arts called qu, and it's a kind of rhythmic storytelling with bamboo clappers, and you tell a story. And you know, the way stand-up comedy is developing in China, a lot of people are doing it because they don't like xiangsheng anymore. It's kind of a reaction against xiangsheng.
How come?
But they want something new, or they're just tired with that sort of format. And I'm telling them, well, you know, actually, comedic arts are quite similar, whether it's stand-up or it's xiaopin or or xiangsheng. They're all actually interrelated. You don't need to, you can learn from each other. So you know, a lot of them are trying to get away from xiangsheng, and I'm saying, well, I can actually take the things that I learned in xiangsheng and I can bring them into stand-up comedy, and it's not a conflict. So, for instance, I do this kwaibar, the rhythmic clapping, as part of my stand-up. It's a group of 5 in this hand and 2 in this hand, the big clappers and the little clappers. So the difference is, you know, a proper kwaibar performance will be an entire story. You start and you do this thing to start off, and then you do an entire story, and then there's a climax and it ends. What I do with stand-up, of course, is that you break it apart. So you're trying to tell a story, but oh, you get stuck, and oh, you can't say that, or you know, it got that part wrong or something. You break it apart, and you end up making fun of yourself. Like if I was doing a proper kwaibar, I would be, you know, demonstrating traditional culture and my skill and everything. But when you take it into stand-up comedy, you're doing the opposite. It's like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, you know, got that wrong.
And now you have to please the younger generation. Is it different?
Well, that's one problem I have. This performance with the stand-up comedy, it tends to be the internet generation. It's people that have some experience with this, watching online, Louis C.K. or Jerry Seinfeld or these people, and they have a little bit of idea what stand-up comedy is. One of the problems I have with my audience is that they often bring their parents. So like I'm trying to reach this post-80s, post-90s generation, and they're all saying, oh, my mama 特别喜欢你, my mother really likes you, and then they bring their mother. Well, and some of the younger performers that I work with who do like the warm-up acts and everything, they say when they do my gigs, it's a little bit difficult because they're so used to talking to the post-90s generation, and they come to my audience and they say, okay, well, boy, we've got like such a huge range of people here. What do we do now? And it is difficult. It's been a bit of an experience for me.
What is the magic then, Dashan, to satisfy all these very different generations among your audience?
Well, the setup is very important. So letting people know it's not, what you're seeing now is not, you know, the very first thing I do on stage when I come out and I say, oh, everyone's so excited, oh, thanks, you know, you're all looking forward to seeing that Dashan from TV, aren't you? And everyone goes, yeah, and I say, well, go home and watch TV then. Because you're not, you know, you don't come out to a live performance to watch TV, folks. So from the very first joke, it's telling people, this is not Dashan from TV. Okay, well, I'm going to show you the other side now. Yeah, I think there's a real demand for people to see humor that's really down to earth and really reflects their daily life, and that's what we do with live comedy. It's not polished, and it's not, you know, a lot of production value and really exaggerated and everything. It's really just having a dialogue directly with the audience.
For Dashan, the challenge of exploring the nuances of Chinese humor is just part of the fun of his job. He told me more about how he plays with cultural differences and what he's learned. It's quite interesting phenomenon. It seems, Dashan, you are playing into the stereotypes while at the same time playing against the stereotype of the so-called a person, Dashan. Explain to us how it works.
Sir, I have a public image of being the uber China hand, right? I'm Mr. Perfect. He knows everything about China, and his Chinese is so perfect, better than the Chinese people. That's the stereotype. But that's also the stereotype that I take apart and I have fun with. So I tell people, you know, one of the reasons that I stopped performing xiangsheng is that I just was bragging all the time. And every show I was like better than the last one. I started doing tongue twisters, and then I'm doing Peking opera, and now I'm doing this. And like there's nothing I don't know. I'm just...
Well, one has to admit the fun of it is to let you, quote unquote, a foreigner, to perform better than a Chinese about skills that the Chinese should have.
Well, what we were doing was creating a new stereotype because, of course, the universal stereotype of foreigners in any culture is that they don't speak the language, they don't understand the customs, they do dumb things, they're weird. You know, that's the typical foreign stereotype. And what we did over the 1990s through xiangsheng was we created a new image that was the reverse of that. So here's a foreigner, speaks perfect Chinese, knows everything about the country, knows things we don't even know as Chinese people. So that at first that was good because it was flipping the traditional stereotype. But you're right, it then became its own stereotype. The uber China hand who knows everything. Right. So what I do now is I take that apart and I say, you know, I had to work really hard on those performances, and actually behind the scenes, here's what we did, and here's some of the mistakes I made. You know, for instance, this one won't translate very well, but I use the expression, 给你露一手, 歇了胡子拔门帘给你露一手. Well, what's 歇了胡子? 歇了胡子 is Beijing dialect. It's not traditional, it's not proper Chinese. Oh, so bihu, it means gecko. There's a gecko on the wall, and he opens the curtain, and you can see his hand. And I'm thinking, I don't get it. Gecko on the wall, and he opens the curtain, you can see his little hand. I had no idea what that means, right? But I thought, okay, well, I don't know why this is funny, but I'll just go on stage. And so I went on stage and I just said, oh, 墙上有个壁虎啊，拉开窗帘看见了他的手啊. I just like direct translation. There was a gecko on the wall. I saw his hand. Doesn't make any sense. And the reason is to see somebody's hand, 露一手 in Chinese is a euphemism for show your skill, to demonstrate your skill. 展示技能. I didn't get that. So I tell people, you know, this is what really happened on stage. I didn't actually understand what I was saying, and I made a fool of myself. But you know, it's through making a fool of myself for all these mistakes that I made on the way that I eventually became better.
What about the language difference, Dashan? I mean, sometimes when you translate a joke from English into Chinese, it totally kills the fun. And the other way around too. So how to make sure the joke is not being lost in translation?
Well, I overcome the translation problem by not ever translating. I only work in Chinese. I did one joke in English on stage where I was talking about second tier and third tier cities and how you go to a fourth tier city and everyone just imagines that they just assume you're Dashan if you look like a Westerner. I told that one joke in English. But you know, all of my work is in Chinese, and I can't do both. Do both is twice as much work. So my focus is on the Chinese side and working in Chinese, so I never work in translation. The only time I work in translation is I've got the joke and it's polished, and I have a little bit of video and I want to put up something on the internet, and I have to put English subtitles, and then I realize, oh man, like for instance, I had one joke in Chinese about the name Dashan. You know, it's not too sophisticated, but it's not too low either.
为什么大山这个名字比建华要俗一点，比二狗子要雅？
Right? At least it's better than argoza. And I thought, oh, how do you translate argoza in English? The way I solved that, for instance, is to say, well, argoza is just kind of a derogatory kind of name that parents give their children, because it's kind of a superstition or a tradition that you give your children ugly names, and it helps them in their development. So I thought, okay, well, don't translate second dog then. Just think of a name like, what would you call your kid, like Blockhead or Bonehead or something.
Really?
Yeah.
Names like that?
So, for instance, that's translating the idea, not the language.
But I'm sure trying to analyze and understand a Chinese joke totally into English would totally kill the fun of the joke, isn't it?
Well, I forget who has it. It's a very famous quote about humor that's saying, analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Nobody really enjoys it, and in the end...
Are you sure it's only one frog or two?
No, the reason is nobody really enjoys it, and in the end the frog dies, right? You dissect the humor dies in the dissection. So, yeah.
But there are also humor with Chinese characteristics, isn't it? I mean, sometimes when you tell a joke in China, it could have political or social connotation, and therefore you tend to say a very small part of it and let all the others to guess about the rest of the jokes. And yet these kind of jokes work really well.
You know, there is political or social or even sexual humor in China, but it tends to be much more implied. Right? It's what they call a 擦边球. You don't shoot the ball right into the net. You just sort of shoot it off to the side. It sort of goes off to the side, and you realize, oh, he's aiming. That's where he's aiming, right?
今天呢，有没有刚刚从中国大陆跑出来的贪官？有没有？哎，你别说，还底下还真的有人欢呼，好几个欢呼。我底下一看呢，全都指着旁边那人呢，哇！
So that's what we call in Chinese a 擦边球. It just shoots off to the side.
Exactly.
So a lot of that is more implied. Although I'd have to say, you know, it's very hard to generalize because sometimes Chinese humor is even more direct than Western humor. It's the opposite of what we would expect. So for instance, if you go to the Northeast and you watch the 二人转, which tends to be a husband-wife couple, that's a lot of sexual humor that's very direct, actually. It really depends. I mean, it is, you know, like I'm sure you keep saying during your show, it's a very diverse country and a very complex country, and it's very hard to summarize saying there's one Chinese sense of humor, you know, or one Chinese audience. You know, they're very different.
Is it easy to make the Chinese laugh?
Oh boy, you know what? It is.
Put alongside.
Oh yeah, comedy is so difficult. It's the hardest thing I could do. I mean, I've done lots of things over the years, and I find comedy is the hardest. It's not difficult to make people laugh, but to make people laugh in a way that makes them feel good, that they respect you, and that they remember it, and they think of it tomorrow, and they can still laugh. That's tough. That's tough. I mean, all you have to do is and people laugh, right? But you know why? To make them laugh afterwards, and you know, it's more sort of the sense they have after they laugh that's important, and that's really hard.
Mark Roswell, also known as Dashan, has been called the most famous foreigner in China. Over the last 25 years, he has worked as a media personality and cultural ambassador in the country. It's hard to find anyone in China who does not know of Dashan. Born and raised in Canada, Roswell began studying Chinese in the mid-1980s, first at the University of Toronto and later at Beijing University. While in Beijing, Roswell became interested in Chinese performing arts, particularly xiangseng, or traditional Chinese crosstalk, a popular form of comic dialogue. An opportunity to appear on television suddenly gave Roswell national exposure under the stage name Dashan. Repeated appearances on programs with audiences in the hundreds of millions gradually turned Dashan into a household name across China. While Dashan got his start performing comedy, today he is seen more as a cultural ambassador between China and the West. This year, he has also been appointed as the ambassador for the 16th Meet in Beijing Arts Festival. To many people, Dashan is a prominent symbol of East meets West, finding common ground between the two cultures.
But that's what I really enjoy in my work, is being able to, you know, go up and go down, as they say. Let me give you a good example. When the Canadian Prime Minister came in 2012, and I'm there as the, you know, he officially appointed me Canada's Goodwill Ambassador to China, and I'm doing cultural exchange, and I was taking the Prime Minister for a tour of the Temple of Heaven in Beijing. And so I went to the hotel where the Prime Minister was staying, and I got in the motorcade, you know, Canadian flags and the police escort and this official Prime Minister's motorcade, and we went to the Temple of Heaven, and I did this event at the Temple of Heaven, and then my work was finished. So the motorcade went off, and I just stayed there, and then I thought, now what do I do? Well, I just got out my subway card, and I went down into the subway, and I took the subway home. And I thought, you know, half an hour ago I was in a Prime Minister's motorcade, and now I'm on the subway. But for me, that's what I really enjoy about my role, is that I can do the official cultural ambassador stuff, or I can just go to a bar and we can have some fun, and we can be really down to earth.
So what do your Chinese audience really enjoy, the behind the scene Dashan?
So, for instance, one of the stories I tell, people say, you know, Dashan, you're so famous in China, but nobody in the West knows you. And I tell a little bit of story about that. I was once during the Olympics in 2008 in Beijing. I had the opportunity to appear on the Today Show with Matt Lauer.
Wow.
You know, big show. I thought, oh, here's my break. I'm finally going to be famous in America. But the show, the first question that Matt asked me, I just got stuck. He just said, "Yo, I hear you're really famous in China. How famous are you?" Like, how? I don't know how to answer that question, right? You're supposed to ask someone else. Don't ask me. I don't know. Anyway, so I tell this story. I go into detail and everything, how during the Olympics, I was at the closing ceremony, and I saw my idol, Yao Ming, great basketball player, great East-West ambassador, you know, 4 feet taller than everybody else. He's really easy to recognize. And everyone was hoarding him for photos. Everyone wanted a photo. And I thought, no, I won't bother him. You know, poor guy. It's the Olympics. Come on, let's enjoy the show. Don't bother him with too many photos. So I turned my back and I was watching the show. And about 5 minutes later, somebody came, tapped me on the shoulder, and I looked around, and there's this waist, right? And I look up, wow, and it's Yao Ming. And he's got a camera in his hand, and he says, "Could I have my picture with you?" Right? And I thought, oh, that's what I should tell Matt Lauer. I gotta go and tell Matt Lauer, Yao Ming asked for my picture, man.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dashan.
Thank you.
With us. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again next time for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.